Okay, class. We're on Chapter 20, dealing with employment law. This is an important topic for people who are in business, because obviously most businesses require employees. It's also important for employees to know their rights. There are actually not a whole lot of concepts to know in this, so we're going to be able to cover it fairly quickly, but it is important. So the first thing we need to know is that virtually every state in the Union, since most of this law has to do with state law, are what we call employment at will states. And that means that employees can be fired at the will of the employer without any specific reason or any reason, and an employee has the right to quit without any specific reason, etc. Okay? So either party may terminate at any time for any reason unless the contract provides the contrary. So that brings us to the two exceptions to the at-will doctrine. The first exception is where there's a contract of employment. Very few people actually have contracts of employment. Unions are the most prevalent area where there's actually a contract of employment. The other area is with higher level people like CEOs, etc. Now, there was a time when the courts were interpreting employment manuals as contracts because of the language in those manuals. By now, hopefully, most employers have caught on to that, and when they have a manual that they give to the employee to either keep or read, it'll usually say on the first page or early on, and maybe even throughout, that this does not create a contract of employment. And so it's very rare that you see that anymore. The other situation, which is one of the main areas, is where there is a federal or state statute that creates a right to employment or a right not to be discharged for certain reasons. So there are two situations there. One is generally the federal civil rights statutes that deal with termination where it is based upon discrimination. And the other is some unusual statutes that states have that protect employees. Sometimes both at the state and federal level we have whistleblower statutes that protect employees, and that's been in the news a lot with the president. A whistleblower is basically a person protected by a law in a certain area of employment for reporting certain violations by the employer of state or federal law. Okay. In Georgia, an exception is an appearance in court. If you are subpoenaed to go to court for any reason, or if you're a party to a lawsuit, you cannot be fired from your job for that reason. This is to facilitate the judicial process. We actually had a case that I did many years ago where an employee was fired for having to go to court to be with her juvenile child, and we sued the employer and got a nice settlement for that wrongful discharge. Okay, so that's an example in Georgia of a special statute relating to not being terminated. Okay. So exceptions based on contract theory. As I said, some courts imply a contract. Usually that's through a employment manual. Okay. And so if you are fired outside the terms of that implied contract, you may have a cause of action against the employer. Also, there may be some tort theories upon which a person could recover for a wrongful discharge. For example, intentional infliction of emotional distress or defamation tied to the termination. Okay. There's also some public policy justifications that courts will uphold. Usually whistleblowers one even when there may not be a statute. So that's a situation where the employer's firing violates a fundamental public policy of the jurisdiction. So generally it's required that that be in a statute. And again, we talked about whistleblowing. So that completes part 1 of chapter 20.